Hello, and welcome to this lecture on victimology. While most work in the field of criminology focuses on crime and criminal offenders, some theorists and researchers focus specifically on victimization. So victimology, or the study of victims and their experiences, began to emerge in the 1940s when some theorists began to examine the interactive nature of crime, particularly the way in which a victim's actions or lifestyle may have facilitated or even provoked an offender's actions, including that offender's decision to choose that victim over another person. While the study of victimization continues to examine factors that facilitate crime, victimology has also expanded to include the study of crime's impact on primary and secondary victims, contributing to our understanding of what victims need after crime occurs, including tangible needs such as financial compensation, as well as intangible needs such as safety and social connection. However, the two main goals of victimology research remain the same, and that is to generate and test theories of victimization so that victimization can be prevented. Early theories of victimization focused on victim precipitation, or the idea that some victims of violent crime are victimized because they acted in ways that either provoked or promoted their victimization. As your textbook explains, this is a somewhat controversial assertion, especially in cases of sexual assault, because it can seem as though we are blaming the victim for the crime or insinuating that a victim shares some responsibility with the offender for the incident. As you're reading more about these theories this week, I encourage you to try to appreciate the difference between holding an offender accountable for their actions and acknowledging the ways that we can all increase, though not ensure, our own safety. So rather than victim blaming, I believe we can examine research studies related to victim precipitation and see them as vehicles for crime prevention and personal empowerment. Now, we can trace victim precipitation theory back to a guy named Hans von Hentig. Hentig was interested in the criminal victim dyad and wondered to what degree victims of violent crime actually facilitate the criminal act. So in 1941, he published a victim typology that included 13 categories for victims based on their likelihood to be victimized and also their likelihood to provoke victimization. It's important to note that Hentig's typology was not rooted in empirical evidence, but rather anecdotal observations and assumptions that he was making. In the 1950s, Benjamin Mendelsohn, who is known as the father of victimology, refined the work of Hentig and developed his own typology, which included 6 categories of crime victims. His categories were based entirely on the victim's degree of provocation or accountability. For example, his first category, which he called, quote, the completely innocent victim, end quote, included those who share no responsibility for their victimization. However, his 5th category, which he called, quote, the most guilty victim, end quote, includes those who initiate a crime and are consequently killed or injured. So this might include someone who robs a bank, holds people hostage, and is eventually shot and killed by the police. Mendelssohn's final category, what he called, quote, the imaginary victim, end quote, includes those who falsify or lie about being victimized, either willfully or due to some kind of psychiatric delusion. In the 1960s, Stefan Schaefer develops yet another similar typology and uses the term functional responsibility to assert the same idea as Hentig and Mendelssohn before him, that some victims of violent crime share responsibility for their own victimization and should act in the interest of their own safety. So Schaeffer's typology is somewhat unique in that he includes the ways that social power and marginalization can cause some people in society to be targeted by criminal offenders. For example, his fourth category, which he calls, quote, biologically weak victims, end quote, includes people victimized due to factors like age or disability. Circumstances, in other words, in which Schaeffer asserts they share no responsibility for the crime. And his fifth category, which he calls, quote, socially weak victims, end quote, includes people victimized due to social marginalization, such as someone targeted because they are transgender or because they are an immigrant. Victim precipitation can be broken down into two forms, passive and active. Passive victim precipitation, we also sometimes call this facilitation, means that the victim failed to do something that may have prevented their victimization. An active victim precipitation, which we also sometimes call provocation, means that the victim actively did something that led to their victimization. For example, if I fail to lock my doors at night, the doors to my home, and someone just walks into my home to rob and assault me, that's what we call passive victim precipitation. You could argue that my actions, or really in this case my inaction, my failure to lock my door, helped facilitate my victimization, even though the offender alone is legally and morally responsible for it. So maybe a locked door would have motivated the offender to move on to another, more accessible house. However, if I get drunk at a bar and I pick a fight with someone who ends up injuring me, that's what we would call active victim precipitation or provocation. That fight likely wouldn't have occurred if I hadn't taken two actions. Number one, getting drunk, and number two, provoking the offender. Another core theory related to victimization is lifestyle exposure theory. Now, this theory emerged in the 1970s and asserts that our lifestyle helps determine our risk for criminal victimization. This theory has a lot of research to back it up because for many crimes, the most reliable predictor of future victimization is previous victimization. So according to this theory, our lifestyle includes our daily routine, such as where and when we go to work, where we go to school, and where we call home, as well as leisure activities, including what we do for fun, when we do it, and where we do it. For example, if I live in a big city and I have to walk alone at night after my shift ends at 2 a.m., in order to get home, I am likely to be victimized. I'm more likely, rather, to be victimized than the person who lives in a small town and they drive themselves home in their car after their shift ends at 5 p.m. Similarly, if I enjoy going out to bars and having some drinks with friends every Friday night, I am more likely to be victimized than the person who enjoys staying home each night reading novels by herself. In other words, our lifestyle determines who we come into contact with, at what times, and in what places, and some of us live with greater risks than others. I'll end today by talking about routine activities theory, which has a lot in common with lifestyle exposure theory. So routine activities theory is not solely associated with victimology. It's also an important theory that we associate with the classical school, something we'll learn about more later in our course. Routine activities theory has a broad predictive scope. And remember, that means it claims to explain many types of crimes. And in a nutshell, it states that most crimes occur when three elements are present together in time and space. And those elements include, number one, a motivated offender, number two, a suitable target, and number three, the absence of a capable guardian. In other words, through the course of their normal daily routine, motivated offenders will see opportunities to commit crime, and they'll strike when the circumstances appear favorable to them getting what they want without facing negative consequences. So this theory is used by our policing agencies every day to help them investigate crimes ranging from minor thefts to severe violence. It's also used to help agencies devise effective ways to use patrol officers to best prevent and quickly respond to crime within a city or a community. And perhaps without even knowing it, many of us also use this theory on a daily basis to prevent our own victimization. When we actively do things to make us or our property less tempting targets of crime, we are applying this theory to our own decision making. For example, when I lock my car door or turn on my porch light at night, I am employing guardians and trying to make myself less likely to be selected by someone motivated to steal someone's belongings or break into a home. As with victim precipitation theory, routine activity theory is not in the business of blaming victims or even explaining what motivates criminal offenders. It's simply a theory that highlights and explains patterns in the data that we have about crime and victimization, patterns that we can analyze and use to help ourselves stay safer in an imperfect world. I encourage you to spend some time this week thinking about the things you do in your own life to prevent victimization, as well as new strategies or perhaps even changes in your own lifestyle that you could employ to help prevent crime in your own life. Again, when we consider the interactive nature of crime, this does not mean that we share legal or moral accountability when someone victimizes us. Viewing crime this way simply invites us to reflect on ways that we can keep ourselves, one another, and our property safer and more secure.